It always starts with an entirely ordinary moment. You are pouring a cup of coffee, answering an email, or driving home from work, and then the phone rings. In the span of a single breath, the universe splits violently into two distinct eras, the before and the after. Sudden loss does not just break your heart, it shatters your fundamental understanding of reality. The person who anchored your world is gone, and your brain is instantly thrust into a state of physiological and psychological shock. Tunnel vision sets in, the air feels unbearably heavy, and the mind frantically tries to process an entirely unrecognizable landscape. Yet, in Western culture, this moment of ultimate devastation is immediately met with a barrage of administrative and social demands. While your soul feels like it has been ripped from your body, society expects you to instantly become an event planner. You are tasked with choosing a casket, negotiating with funeral directors, and writing an eloquent obituary. You must organize a memorial service, curate a playlist of tasteful music, and figure out how to cater a reception for 50 people. Then, after a meager 3 days of corporate bereavement leave, you are expected to be back at your desk, answering emails as if the world has not just ended. It is a completely absurd, psychologically devastating expectation. We live in a society that is fundamentally terrified of pain, and our modern grief rituals reflect that fear. We treat mourning like a minor logistical inconvenience, a brief interruption in productivity that needs to be managed, sanitized, and neatly wrapped up. But there is an ancient blueprint that recognized the sheer madness of this approach thousands of years before the invention of modern psychology. The Jewish practice of Shiva is often misunderstood as merely a religious obligation or a cultural tradition. In reality, it is a meticulously structured, universally applicable psychological framework designed specifically for surviving the unsurvivable. To understand why this ancient system is so revolutionary, we first have to look at the modern grief crisis we are currently living in. We are suffocating under the weight of toxic positivity and the relentless societal pressure for closure. When tragedy strikes, the people around the mourner are often deeply uncomfortable with the raw, messy reality of death. Because they do not know how to sit with pain, they attempt to fix it with hollow platitudes. Mourners are bombarded with phrases like, "Everything happens for a reason," "They are in a better place," or "At least you had them for as long as you did." These statements are not actually designed to comfort the grieving. They are designed to alleviate the anxiety of the bystander. Western culture treats grief like a puzzle to be solved or an illness to be cured. We demand that mourners show resilience, praising them when they put on a brave face and appear strong in the wake of tragedy. But this expectation inflicts massive psychological damage. It forces the traumatized individual into a state of severe cognitive dissonance. You are required to pretend you are okay when you are fundamentally not okay, expending your last remaining drops of energy on managing the emotions of the people around you. The psychological toll of this performance is staggering. When society demands that you bounce back, it effectively invalidates your trauma, leaving you entirely isolated in your suffering. The brain in acute shock requires immense amounts of time and space to process the reality of loss, but modern capitalism simply demands productivity. We have created a culture where we suck at grieving because we refuse to acknowledge what grief actually requires: the absolute permission to fall apart. This is exactly where the genius of the ancient Jewish blueprint begins, starting with a phase of mourning that most people have never even heard of. Before the 7 days of Shiva even begin, there is an initial, agonizing window of time between the moment of death and the moment of burial. In Jewish law, this period is known as asterisk ananat asterisk, and the person enduring it is called an asterisk one asterisk. This is the stage of acute, unmitigated horror. The reality of the death is fresh. The body has not yet been laid to rest, and the mourner is trapped in a surreal, suffocating limbo. The psychological brilliance of asterisk ananat lies in its radical approach to societal and religious expectations. Under this ancient framework, an asterisk one asterisk is officially and legally exempt from all positive commandments. They are not required to pray. They are not allowed to perform daily rituals, say blessings over their food, or engage in philosophical study. In a religion that normally demands strict adherence to daily structure and continuous dialogue with the divine, the system suddenly hits a complete emergency stop. The community looks at the mourner and says, "We demand absolutely nothing of you." This exemption is not a punishment. It is a profound act of psychological validation. The ancient rabbis understood something that modern neuroscience has only recently proven. A brain in the grip of acute trauma cannot process abstract concepts. When the amygdala is hijacked by unimaginable grief, the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for higher-order thinking, social pleasantries, and theological contemplation, shuts down. You cannot philosophize about the meaning of life or the benevolence of the universe when your immediate reality has just been destroyed. During Ananat, the mourner has only one job, and one job alone, to tend to the immediate needs of the dead. All of their hyper-focused, frantic energy is channeled entirely into the practical reality of the burial. They do not have to host visitors, they do not have to accept condolences, and they are expressly forbidden from engaging in small talk. The system recognizes that forcing a shattered person to participate in the normal rhythms of life is a form of psychological cruelty. It gives the mourner absolute, uncompromising permission to be utterly broken, entirely exempting them from the exhausting burden of being a functioning human being. But this intense, unstructured period of chaos cannot last forever, or it would entirely consume the mourner. This is why the transition out of Ananat is designed to be swift and decisive. In this tradition, the burial happens incredibly quickly, often within 24 hours of the death. There is no agonizing 2-week wait for an open weekend at the funeral parlor, no prolonged lingering in the unbearable limbo of the unburied dead. The raw, visceral act of returning the body to the earth serves as a harsh but necessary psychological punctuation mark. The worst has happened, the physical goodbye is complete, and the chaotic exemption of Ananat is officially over. Following the burial, the mourner washes the dirt from their hands and returns home. This physical movement from the graveyard back to the living room marks one of the most vital psychological transitions in the human experience. It is the moment the hourglass is flipped. The frantic, unmoored chaos of the immediate aftermath fades into the heavy, grounded stillness of the home. The door closes behind them, and the 7-day clock of Shiva officially begins. They have survived the initial shock, but now they must face the terrifying prospect of learning how to live in a world that is missing its center. To do this, the environment around them must be completely and radically altered. The rules of normal society must be suspended, and the physical space of the home must transform to mirror the devastation inside their mind. Subscribe for part 2, where we will explore exactly how this transformation happens and uncover the psychological genius behind why mourners purposefully destroy their own clothes and cover every mirror in their house. You walk back through your front door, the heavy reality of the cemetery behind you, and society immediately expects you to pull yourself together. In the modern secular world, you're supposed to change into a neat, pressed black suit or a modest dress, projecting an image of dignified composure. But when your heart has just been violently torn in half, why are you forced to pretend that you are whole? The ancient blueprint of Shiva completely rejects this toxic performance of dignity. Before you even sit down to begin the 7 days of mourning, you must perform a visceral, physical act known as kriya. Kriya translates simply to tearing, and it requires the mourner to physically destroy a piece of their own clothing. Standing before their community, the mourner takes a shirt worn directly over their heart and forcefully rips the fabric. It is not a delicate, hidden snip with a pair of scissors. It is a violent, audible tear that echoes through the silence of the room. For the next 7 days, the mourner will wear this ruined garment without ever attempting to hide its jagged edges. They will not change into something more presentable for guests, and they will not apologize for their disheveled appearance. The psychological genius of this ancient act is incredibly profound when viewed through the lens of modern trauma therapy. Grief is an invisible wound, and one of its most isolating aspects is that you look perfectly normal on the outside while bleeding out on the inside. Crier violently externalizes that internal devastation for the world to see. It provides a visual, undeniable manifestation of the mourner's shattered psychological state, immediately communicating to every person in the room that this individual is fundamentally broken. It completely removes the pressure to smile, nod, or assure others that you are doing fine. Furthermore, the torn garment serves as a brilliant psychological metaphor for the absolute permanence of sudden loss. When the mourning period eventually ends, the shirt can be sewn back together, but the scar in the fabric will remain permanently visible. The garment will never hang exactly as it did before, and the threads will never perfectly align. This perfectly mirrors the harsh reality of grief. You will eventually heal and continue living, but you will never return to the exact person you were before the tear. Once the garment is torn, the mourner steps further into a physical environment that has been radically altered to match their emotional baseline. As you walk through a Shiva house, you will notice that every single mirror has been covered with a sheet or turned to face the wall. In our normal daily lives, mirrors are relentless tools of self-presentation and societal vanity. They constantly remind us to check our hair, fix our posture, and ensure our physical appearance is acceptable to the outside world. By covering the mirrors, the ancient system completely removes the exhausting cognitive load of self-presentation. The mourner is officially freed from the judgmental gaze of society, and more importantly, from their own self-scrutiny. They do not need to worry about how tired, puffy, or hollowed out they look, because for these 7 days, their physical appearance is entirely irrelevant. The ego is systematically dismantled, allowing the mourner to exist purely in their raw, unfiltered emotional state, without the burden of maintaining a physical facade. Next, the mourner takes their place in the room, but they do not sit on a plush sofa or a comfortable armchair. Instead, they are required to sit on a low stool, a wooden box, or even directly on the floor. In a society that equates physical elevation with status and comfort, intentionally bringing oneself low feels deeply counterintuitive. Yet, this practice is a masterclass in what modern psychologists call somatic grounding. Acute grief is a distinctly physical sensation. It is a heavy, suffocating weight that literally drags you downward. It makes your limbs feel like lead and your spine feel entirely unable to support your own body. By forcing the mourner to sit close to the earth, the system creates total cognitive congruence between the physical body and the shattered mind. You do not have to expend precious energy holding yourself upright in a posture of false strength. Your physical position in the room aligns perfectly with your emotional devastation. This physical transformation of the mourner extends far beyond just the furniture and the mirrors. During the 7 days of Shiva, mourners are strictly stripped of the daily rituals of physical comfort and societal maintenance. They must remove their leather shoes, historically a symbol of luxury and status, and walk around in socks or simple cloth slippers. They are forbidden from shaving, applying makeup, cutting their hair, or even bathing for pleasure. To the modern outside observer, these restrictions might look like an archaic form of self-punishment or religious asceticism. However, reframing this practice reveals its true psychological intent. It is the ultimate, socially sanctioned pause. Modern society demands a relentless, unforgiving march of daily maintenance and capitalist productivity, regardless of what personal tragedies have befallen us. The Shiva system enforces a hard, uncompromising freeze on all of these expectations. When you are consumed by devastating grief, even the simple act of taking a shower or picking out a pair of shoes can feel like climbing a mountain. By stripping away these mundane daily tasks by religious decree, the mourner is granted absolute permission to drop out of the rat race. The traumatized brain is relieved of all superficial decision-making and societal grooming. This effectively funnels all available cognitive energy exactly where it needs to go, processing the massive psychological trauma that has just occurred. The physical environment has been meticulously set, the facade of normalcy has been shattered, and the mourner is finally allowed to exist entirely in their brokenness. But a mourner does not sit in this altered, low-to-the-ground reality entirely alone. Soon, the front door will open, and the community will begin to flood into the home. How do you manage a house full of people when you can barely remember how to breathe? In Part 3, we will explore the strict, psychologically brilliant rules that govern the visitors of a Shiva house, and how this system completely eradicates the modern plague of toxic positivity. The front door opens, and the hardest part of modern grief walks right in: other people. When a catastrophic loss occurs, well-meaning friends and colleagues inevitably flood the grieving person with a barrage of terrible, hollow cliches. They are in a better place now. God just needed another angel. Everything happens for a reason, and at least you had them for a long time. We have all heard these phrases, and many of us have regrettably said them. But why do we instinctively reach for these empty platitudes when faced with someone else's ultimate nightmare? The brutal truth is that we say these things because we are profoundly uncomfortable with their pain. We live in a deeply sanitized culture that treats emotional agony as a problem to be swiftly solved. When we see someone drowning in despair, our own anxiety spikes, and we desperately want to throw them a lifeline of silver linings to make ourselves feel better. We want the awkwardness to end, so we try to wrap their gaping wound in a neat, philosophical bow. But trying to rationalize sudden loss does not comfort the mourner. It actively alienates them. This is where the ancient, uncompromising rules of the Shiva house step in to completely dismantle our modern social anxieties. In traditional Jewish law, there is a strict, non-negotiable protocol for paying a condolence call. The visitor must absolutely not speak until the mourner speaks first. You walk into the room, you sit down, and you wait in total silence. You do not offer a cheerful greeting. You do not ask how they are holding up, and you certainly do not offer unsolicited spiritual advice. The psychological genius of this rule is breathtaking. By enforcing absolute silence, the system places total, unmitigated control back into the hands of a traumatized person whose entire world has just spun wildly out of their grasp. The mourner dictates the exact terms of the interaction based on their immediate psychological capacity in that specific minute. If they want to sit and stare blankly at the wall while crying, you sit in silence and stare at the wall with them. If they want to scream about the unfairness of the universe, you simply listen to them scream. Conversely, if their exhausted brain needs a temporary escape and they want to talk about the local sports team or the weather, you talk about the weather. This brilliant social mechanism completely removes the exhausting burden of the mourner having to host their guests. In normal social situations, we are conditioned to fill awkward silences and manage the comfort levels of the people visiting our homes. The rule of silence explicitly forbids the mourner from having to manage anyone else's emotions, freeing them from the performance of polite conversation. By gagging the visitors, the Shiva system directly attacks the modern, toxic compulsion to fix grief. Western society fundamentally misunderstands mourning, treating it like a broken bone that just needs the right cast and a bit of physical therapy to heal. But the ancient rabbis understood that deep grief is entirely unfixable. There is no magic sequence of words that can resurrect the dead or undo the catastrophic shattering of a family. Therefore, the community's job is not to offer solutions, but simply to bear witness. This is the psychological concept of holding space, showing up and remaining physically present in the darkest corners of human suffering without trying to change the scenery. When a mourner's reality has been ripped apart, they feel entirely untethered from the earth. The sheer, quiet physical presence of the community acts as a heavy, psychological anchor. You do not need to say the right thing, because there is no right thing to say. Your physical body occupying a chair in that room is the entire point of the visit. It is a silent, profound declaration that says, "Your world has ended, and it is terrifying, but I'm not going to leave you alone in the dark." This shifts the focus from intellectualizing the loss to simply surviving it together, side by side. But surviving the abyss requires more than just emotional anchoring. It requires a radical shift in how the basic mechanics of life are handled. In a traditional Shiva house, the front door is left completely unlocked. This might seem like a minor security detail, but it serves a deeply empathetic purpose. The mourner, sitting low to the ground in their torn clothes, does not have to expend the physical or mental energy to get up, walk to the door, and greet every single arrival. The community simply lets themselves in. Once inside, the community completely takes over the physical maintenance of the household, starting with the most basic human need: food. Visitors do not wait to be offered a glass of water, and the mourner is strictly forbidden from serving anyone. In fact, the mourner does not pour a single cup of coffee, wash a single dish, or prepare a single meal for the entire week. The collective village brings the bagels, sets up the platters, coordinates the dinners, and quietly cleans up the kitchen afterward. This is a masterclass in what modern psychologists call cognitive offloading. When the brain is processing acute trauma, its executive functioning completely collapses. Remembering to eat, deciding what to cook, or figuring out how to feed your surviving children becomes an impossibly complex mountain to climb. The Shiva system recognizes that the bottom tier of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, food, water, and basic physical maintenance, cannot be left up to a shattered mind. By entirely outsourcing the logistics of survival to the community, the mourner is granted a profound psychological luxury. They do not have to pretend to be a functioning adult. Their entire cognitive load is lifted, allowing them to exist purely in their emotional brain. The village literally builds a fortress of practical support around them, ensuring that the physical body is sustained, while the mind does the agonizing work of confronting the void. The rules of engagement have been set, the toxic positivity has been silenced, and the community has built a protective, functioning wall around the devastated household. But existing in this raw, unstructured emotional state is incredibly dangerous if left unchecked. How long can a human mind endure this level of intense, communal vulnerability before it completely fractures? Next, in Part 4, we will examine the strict chronological boundaries of this process. We will uncover why this period lasts for exactly 7 days, and how an unavoidable, daily, rhythmic structure keeps the mourner from drowning forever in the abyss. When sudden loss hits, time loses all meaning, and the hours stretch into an unrecognizable, agonizing sludge. You might sleep at 3 in the afternoon, stare blankly at the ceiling at 4 in the morning, and completely lose track of what day it is. Without the normal anchors of work and social obligations, the grieving mind is left entirely untethered in a dark, formless void. If left unchecked, this profound temporal disorientation can easily trigger a complete descent into psychological madness. To survive the sheer, unmitigated chaos of a shattered reality, the human psyche desperately requires a container. The ancient blueprint of Shiva provides exactly that, a rigid, non-negotiable temporal container. The word Shiva literally translates to the number 7, dictating the precise length of this acute, communal mourning period. But why exactly 7 days? In the ancient Jewish framework, a week is not just an arbitrary measurement of time. It is the fundamental, foundational cycle of creation. According to ancient texts, the entire universe was spoken into existence, structured, and completed in exactly 7 days. For the person sitting on the low stool in torn clothing, their old universe has just violently ended. The individual who anchored their reality is gone, and the life they previously knew has been permanently extinguished. Therefore, a completely new world must be painstakingly created from the ashes of the old one. The 7 days of Shiva perfectly mirror this cosmic cycle of creation, giving the mourner the exact amount of time needed to conceptually build a new reality. It is a mandated incubation period for a world where their loved one no longer physically exists. The psychological genius of this specific time frame lies in its strict, uncompromising boundaries. It provides a defined, socially sanctioned beginning, middle, and end to the most acute, paralyzing phase of sudden grief. When you are drowning in the initial, suffocating waves of loss, the prospect of feeling that level of intense pain forever is completely intolerable. The 7-day boundary acts as a vital psychological safety net, whispering to the shattered mind that this specific intensity has an expiration date. It grants the mourner absolute permission to completely fall apart, knowing the community will not let them stay broken on the floor indefinitely. Within this 7-day container, the ancient system introduces an incredibly powerful mechanism for survival, an unavoidable daily routine. In the depths of severe depression and traumatic grief, the natural human instinct is to retreat entirely from the waking world. A mourner might easily stay in bed for days, pulling the covers over their head and entirely disconnecting from the passage of time. To prevent this dangerous, spiraling isolation, the Shiva system brings the structure of the outside world directly into the grieving home. 3 times a day, morning, afternoon, and evening, the community gathers in the living room to form a minyan. A minyan is a mandatory quorum of at least 10 adults required to conduct a communal prayer service. The mourner does not have to travel to a synagogue, get dressed up, or face the overwhelming public to participate. Instead, the quorum physically comes to them, transforming their altered, mirrorless living room into a temporary sanctuary. This requirement is a brilliant, ancient application of behavioral activation, a core component of modern cognitive behavioral therapy. The community's arrival forces a gentle but inescapable rhythm upon the mourner's chaotic, timeless void. Even if the grieving person feels entirely numb, they must physically shift their posture and acknowledge the transition from morning to afternoon and afternoon to night. It prevents the days from blurring into one endless, agonizing nightmare by inserting clear, communal punctuation marks into the daily schedule. You cannot lose complete connection to the passage of time when 10 people are continually showing up in your living room to mark it for you. During these 3 daily gatherings, the mourner is required to perform one of the most famous, yet deeply misunderstood, rituals in the entire tradition. They must stand up in front of the gathered community and recite the mourner's Kaddish. If you were to look at a translation of this ancient Aramaic text, expecting a tearful eulogy or a poignant meditation on mortality, you would be deeply confused. In a shocking plot twist, the mourner's Kaddish does not mention death, loss, or sorrow a single time. Instead, it is a soaring, rhythmic, and absolute affirmation of life, peace, and the ultimate magnitude of the divine. It praises the ongoing existence of the universe and expresses a desperate hope for abundant peace to descend upon the world. To force a person whose heart has just been ripped out to stand up and publicly praise the universe seems, at first glance, incredibly cruel. Why demand that someone in the deepest trench of despair recite a poem about the enduring greatness of life? This paradox is actually the ultimate psychological tether designed to keep the mourner anchored to reality. When you are surrounded by the suffocating reality of death, it is dangerously easy to believe that death is the only thing that exists. By forcing the mourner to physically stand up and speak the language of life, the ancient system drags them back from the edge of the abyss. It acts as a daily psychological anchor to the world of the living, demanding that the mourner verbally acknowledge that the universe is still turning. The Kaddish does not ask the mourner to suppress their sadness, fake a smile, or pretend they are happy. It simply requires them to recognize that existence continues outside their shattered living room, and that they are still a part of it. Reciting it alongside the community reinforces that they are not screaming into the void entirely alone. 3 times a day, they stand up, look at the faces of the people holding space for them, and affirm that life, despite its unbearable pain, is still happening. It is a radical, defiant refusal to let death have the final word. For exactly 1 week, this rhythmic, inescapable structure holds the shattered mourner together. The strict boundaries of time, the gentle routine of the daily quorum, and the defiant affirmation of the Kaddish create a perfect incubator for acute survival. But eventually, the sun sets on the 7th day, and the protective container must be opened. How do you possibly pack up the low chairs, uncover the mirrors, and walk out the front door when nothing will ever be normal again? In our final episode, we will look at the psychological masterpiece of the 8th day and the brilliant, agonizing process of transitioning back into the real world. The scariest part of acute mourning is not always the beginning. Terrifyingly, it is often the end. For 7 days, the mourner has been held inside a meticulously constructed, socially sanctioned cocoon of absolute devastation. The mirrors have been covered, the daily responsibilities outsourced, and the unbearable weight of grief entirely validated by the surrounding community. But the world outside those walls has stubbornly continued to turn, oblivious to the fact that yours has permanently stopped. How do you possibly walk out of your front door and re-enter a society that expects you to function as if nothing has changed? This transition is where modern secular grief entirely abandons us, demanding an instantaneous return to productivity the moment bereavement leave expires. The ancient Jewish blueprint, however, treats this re-entry with the exact same psychological precision as the initial shock. On the morning of the seventh day, the intense, highly structured period of Shiva officially concludes. The community gathers in the home one final time, but they do not simply pack up the bagels and leave the mourner to figure out the rest alone. Instead, they instruct the grieving individual to physically stand up from the low stool for the final time. The torn garment is adjusted, and the simple cloth slippers are replaced with regular leather shoes, signaling a definitive shift in physical reality. The community then surrounds the mourner and escorts them out the front door, literally walking with them around the block. This profound, highly choreographed ritual is the ultimate form of gradual exposure therapy. Agoraphobia and severe social anxiety are incredibly common trauma responses following a catastrophic loss. Stepping out into the bright, noisy, unforgiving public sphere for the first time feels like walking onto an alien planet without oxygen. By physically flanking the traumatized person, the community acts as a human buffer against the overwhelming sensory shock of the outside world. They are gently guiding the mourner back into the sunlight, demonstrating that it is physically safe to exist outside the house again. You do not have to cross the threshold of your shattered reality alone. The village that held you in the dark will actively march you back into the light. The walk around the block is short, but its psychological impact is monumental. It serves as a definitive physical punctuation mark that the absolute paralysis of acute grief has concluded. You have survived the unsurvivable week, and now the rules of engagement must shift once more. While Shiva has ended, the ancient system inherently understands that mourning is far from over. Modern Western culture operates on a brutal, binary, on-off switch when it comes to grief. You are either actively crying at the funeral or you are magically over it and back to your normal, cheerful self at the office. Judaism completely rejects this toxic dichotomy by introducing a brilliant, highly structured gradient of healing. The next phase of this psychological blueprint is known as *Sheloshim *, which translates to the first 30 days following the burial. During *Sheloshim *, the mourner officially re-enters the societal stream, returning to work, running errands, and resuming basic household duties. The mirrors are uncovered, the low chairs are put away, and the physical environment of the home returns to normal. However, the mourner is still operating under a specific set of behavioral restrictions that publicly and privately acknowledge their ongoing fragility. For this entire month, they do not attend joyous events, they avoid live music, and they still do not cut their hair or shave. This middle ground is a master class in bridging the massive psychological gap between acute paralysis and full societal participation. You are functional enough to answer emails and buy groceries, but society still formally recognizes that you are internally bleeding. You are not expected to paste on a fake smile at a dinner party or pretend you have the emotional bandwidth for a wedding celebration. The system grants you a socially protected buffer zone, allowing your shattered mind to slowly acclimate to the daily grind without the pressure of forced joy. It validates the lingering, heavy exhaustion of grief, proving that healing is not an instantaneous leap, but a slow, methodical climb. When the 30 days conclude, the restrictions lift for most mourners, but for those who have lost a parent, the gradient extends even further. The mourning period continues for an entire year, anchored by the daily recitation of the Kaddish. For 11 months, the grieving child must continue to show up in the community, structurally dedicating a portion of every single day to honoring the loss. This extended timeline perfectly aligns with what modern psychology tells us about the true trajectory of deep trauma. Grief is not a puzzle to be solved, a phase to be rushed, or a cold to be cured. Instead, deep grief is an emotional amputation. You do not grow the limb back, but you slowly learn how to walk with the prosthetic. The year-long mourning period respects the agonizing reality of the firsts, the first birthday, the first holiday, the first change of seasons without them. It provides a daily, dedicated space to process the evolving nature of the absence as it morphs from sharp agony into a dull, persistent ache. Finally, when the year concludes, the daily obligations cease, but the ancient blueprint institutes one last, permanent psychological check-in. Every year, on the exact Hebrew anniversary of the death, the mourner observes the asterisk Yazite asterisk. A special candle is lit in the home, burning for a full 24 hours, and the Kaddish is recited once again. This annual ritual completely validates the nonlinear nature of grief. It acknowledges that even decades later, the body keeps the score, and the anniversary of the shattering will always carry a unique, heavy atmospheric pressure. You are given explicit permission to pause your life, remember the magnitude of the loss, and stare into the flame of their memory. The Jewish practice of Shiva and its subsequent stages offer a profound, desperately needed antidote to our modern crisis of grief. It teaches us that to survive the unsurvivable, we must first grant ourselves absolute permission to break. We must alter our physical environments to match our internal devastation, silence the toxic positivity of onlookers, and let our community do the heavy logistical lifting. We must rely on strict temporal boundaries to keep us from drowning, and we must re-enter the world gradually, refusing to rush our own healing. This ancient wisdom proves that the key to modern psychological survival has been hiding in plain sight for thousands of years. We do not have to reinvent the wheel when it comes to navigating the darkest chapters of the human experience. By embracing these structured, deeply empathetic frameworks, we can transform how we support ourselves and each other through the inevitable tragedies of life. If you found value in this deep dive into the psychology of ancient traditions, please subscribe to the channel for more explorations into the hidden genius of human rituals.